Hey folks, welcome to another Duende live stream. I'm really excited about today's guests. Today we'll see how Remote Authentication Handler and ASP.NET Core works, why you should build your own, and how it can be used in an everyday real-life solution. But until that, let's do a little bit of housekeeping before we introduce our guests today. So first of all, thank you for joining us live. If you are joining us live, you probably are joining us on YouTube. We also have some folks on LinkedIn. So hi to folks on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today. If you are on YouTube, you'll see that there is a live chat. So if you have any questions during today's live stream, feel free to put them there. Duende, me, and Martin, who's back there working the back room, we'll keep track of all the questions and we'll ask our guests the questions throughout the live stream. So please ask any questions. Also make some friends, like live chat is there so you can make new connections with other .NET developers. A big question that gets asked during these live streams, is this being recorded? So if you need to go pick up the kids, get to a business meeting, just want to take lunch, you can pause this live stream and come back. Otherwise, just, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. And when this video becomes available, we'll let you know and you can kind of come back and watch it. So on that note, I'm going to introduce our guests today. Both folks are from Active Solution. Robert and Elin both work on an open source project called Active Login. So you can see them right now. Hey, Robert and Elin, how are you folks doing today?
Hey.
Good.
Thanks. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. So on that note, I'll let you folks introduce yourselves if you want to introduce yourselves in a longer capacity. But on that note, I'm going to give you the stage. Martin and I will look at chat. So again, folks, if you're joining us live, please feel free to ask any questions. And to our guests, good luck. We're here if you need us, but otherwise, the stage is yours.
Thank you. So welcome to this session around building a custom authentication solution in ASP.NET Core with the Remote Authentication Handler. So just a quick little introduction about us. So Elin, do you want to start to say something?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Elin Fokine, and I'm working at Active Solution, as Khalid said, together with Robert as a consultant. And I've been working here for about 9 years, and in total about 15 years as a .NET developer. And during my time here at Active Solution, I had the opportunity to accept participating in like regular customer projects, also to spend some time on our open source project, Active Login, which is part of what we are going to talk about today.
Excellent. So Robert Folkesson, I've been working for a pretty long time with different kinds of internet-based stuff. I have a background from Microsoft as well. So I started working quite early with the Azure platform. And together with Elin, I am also one of the originators of the open source project that we base this presentation around. At Active, I also focus a lot on our own security posture and secure development lifecycle and those kind of questions. And just shortly about Active Solutions. So what do we do? Digitalization, kind of as the broad term, but we focus a lot on helping our customers around security and identity management, a lot of data and AI, especially the last couple of years with generative AI, Microsoft Cloud Platform, DevOps, and it says workshops, but really requirement specification and project planning and those kind of things we're pretty good at as well. So let's get started. We will also talk about Active Login. So this is available at GitHub. and you can dig into the code that Elin will show you, and look at the samples for IdentityServer, for example. And I just wanted to kind of give you a background to how this all started. And we will talk a bit more about what active login is and what it is used for. But we've had this notion of the ASP.NET request pipeline for quite some time, going way back now, where you have this HTTP request, it comes in, and then you have middlewares that does some logic on the request stepwise before it actually reaches your app logic, and then can do some steps after it goes out as an HTTP response. So this has been available in ASP.NET for quite some time. It used to be something called Owin that took care of the pipeline, and you had to implement it as an Owin middleware back in the days before .NET Core. And you did have possibilities to use like outside authentication in the form of Google or other external authentication services implemented as Owin middleware and handling the Owin context in the pipeline requests. But there wasn't any kind of coherent way of doing it, and there weren't any base classes that you could use to handle this in the same way for all the authentication handlers. So they were basically their own implementations, just using the Owin middleware way of doing it. And around that time, we were working with something called Swedish BankID and doing integration with Swedish BankID. So Swedish BankID is an authentication solution that the Swedish banks together has developed, that has become the de facto standard for doing authentication of Swedish citizens. So it has a really broad adoption in Sweden. There are around 8 million users that uses it daily now. It used to be SOAP XML back in the days, and it has its own protocol. So it isn't built on some standard protocol like OpenID Connect or anything else. It has its own very involved protocol for doing stuff that we will show as well. So some 10 years ago, we were doing a lot of integration with the OWIN pipeline to integrate with the Swedish BankID. And just to give you an idea what it actually looks like in real life. So, I mean, a lot of services in Sweden are using BankID for as either the only way of authentication or like an option for authentication. So let's just show you a quick example, and let's do it with my kids' Taekwondo club. So if I want to log in to my kids' Taekwondo club, I can either choose the old way of using my email and username and password, or doing the mobile BankID authentication. So now it will challenge me with a QR code, which is derived from a token from the BankID server, and I will use my app on my phone to actually scan that code, do the login with the app, and now I'm logged in. And I can see that, my kid actually has training in a bit less than an hour in the Blue Belt group. So a lot of services are using this service for authentication, and it also gives you this kind of multi-factor way of doing the authentication, either with the mobile app, or as Elin will show you, with an installed certificate-based version on your machine. So let's go back to the presentation. But around 2018, they were releasing a new HTTP JSON-based version. So that was brand new. No one had built any open source support or any components that you could use in the .NET world to just integrate with it. And we were doing it all over again for our customers. So we saw kind of the need for an open source project that would integrate nicely with this BankID solution. And at the same time, ASP.NET Core was being released in the second version. So this was quite new, and they were doing a lot of work, refactoring work from version 1 of ASP.NET Core to version 2. And in version 2, we got this brand new remote authentication handler. So something that derived from the usual authentication handler, where you have the cookie authentication handler, but implemented stuff like OpenID Connect handler, Google handler, Facebook handler, all these kind of handlers for the big services for remote authentication. So we immediately thought that, okay, we need to do this as a remote authentication handler. That's the way forward in the .NET, ASP.NET Core world. And it certainly was. However, this was really poorly documented back in the day. So when it released, there were almost no documents available at Microsoft for how to actually do this. And Peter Örneholm, our colleague at the time, who is an MVP, he actually talked to the ASP.NET team about this and said, hey, you guys, you don't have any documentation around this. And they were like, no, really, we don't want people to implement this yet because this is really hard to get right. So we really need to make the documentation solid for this. But we didn't let that stop us. We kind of figured out how this worked and made what we think a good implementation of it. And it has stayed pretty much the same, even though we continued to add features to the BankID part. So now doing signatures, for example, and other types of checks. So let's jump into a demo and show you the remote authentication handler, a super simple version in action, what it actually looks like. So let's jump into Visual Studio, and let's maybe first look at the account controller and what actually happens when you submit a login. So there's a button in my little example that will just call this login submit. And what I will do here, after just sanitizing the return URL to see that it's just a local URL, is to return a challenge. So I return challenge, and I say that this is the specific scheme for the challenge that I will return. And jumping over to my program.cs, I'm adding authentication. I'm adding a default scheme for authentication, which is cookies. But I'm also setting a default challenge scheme to my custom value here, so my custom remote. And then I'm also using a little extension method here to register that one, sending in a specific callback path. So this is after authentication by the external authentication provider, what will be called for the returning call, and also what scheme will be used for setting the actual logged in principal. I'll show you that in just a second, what that means. So I'm still going to use cookies in the end to keep the user logged in the application after returning from the remote authentication provider. But let's look at this little extension method. So this one will add a scheme with my custom remote authentication handler. So this is a little class I've implemented, which will handle the challenge that I was calling in my login method. So it implements the handle challenge async, and now this would, in most cases, redirect to the actual external authentication provider. And in the BankID scenario, it will redirect to a controller that will start the actual process of communicating with BankID. So Elin will show that in a bit. For this demonstration, though, I will just directly redirect back to the callback URL. So I won't actually send it anywhere elsewhere. I will just redirect back to the same callback URL, which will then trigger the handle remote authenticate async. So this is what is being called when we get back the response from the remote authentication provider. And in this case, I'm just creating a hard-coded principle for demonstration's sake, and then creating an authentication ticket. And this will now use the regular cookie authentication scheme to populate that one with the principle that I'm just hard coding here. And then I'll return a success with that ticket. So if we put some breakpoints in this, I can just show you what it actually looks like when running it. So let's put one here in the account controller as well. So I'm not authenticated. This is my view with that will call the controller for doing the login. This one will then return the challenge and say, by the way, the challenge scheme is custom remote here. Then handle challenge async will get called because that one is the registered one for my custom challenge handler, and we will just return directly back to the callback URL, which will then make us jump into this one, and I will set the identity and the principal with the authentication ticket here, and I'm logged in, and I have the claims that I set, and I have somewhere here an ASP.NET Core cookie set as usual. So that's kind of the base principles of the remote authentication handler. Now there's a lot more things you can do. So for example, if you wanted to, let's jump in the right one. If you wanted to here do something else like fetch some properties from a database, or have the user do a payment with card, or something else that needs to step out of this flow and handle something, there are ways of doing that by setting a temporary cookie, for example, and then go back and set the proper ASP.NET cookie. And actually, Dominic Bayer has a great little video on the Duende on the same YouTube channel for how to handle these kind of more advanced or complex scenarios that you can look at. So if I go back to the slides here, just to reiterate, so we do a challenge with a specific scheme. Actually, right now, I'm setting my custom scheme as the default scheme. So if I would have just omitted the scheme when calling challenge, that would have worked as well, because it is now the default scheme in my little example. But it will challenge with a scheme, and the challenge async method that is registered for that scheme will get invoked. usually redirect to an external provider. In the BankID case, we redirect to an internal controller that we have control over that will kick off the BankID process. And Elin will dig into that in detail in a bit. But usually we go to an external provider. That one does the actual authentication, does a callback. So when the callback comes back, the middleware looks for the handler to process the callback, does the protocol post process, so takes whatever you want from the authenticated user and puts it into a principal. And usually we set the cookie, the ordinary ASP.NET cookie with the external principal, and then redirect to the final URL. So that's kind of the basic flow. I should also mention that if you're feeling now that the scheme part and the ASP.NET cookie part or this kind of more basic parts that you want to dig into these and kind of refresh on those as well, Tore and Stenius did an excellent live show like this, the one before this. So that's also available on the Duende YouTube channel. So if you feel you need to kind of brush up on these basic parts, have a look at that one as well. So before I hand it over to Elin, maybe see if there are any questions in the chat so far.
Yeah, there haven't been any direct questions. Some of the familiar faces, Dominic Byer is in the chat. So if you folks want to talk to like a Duende founder or ask him, yeah, so you can say hi to him. He's in there. But other than that, great explanation so far and great demo. So I'll let you folks continue on. And again, folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask it in chat, and then we'll ask our guest today. So on that note, I'll pass it back to you folks.
So then I'll hand it over to Elin to kind of take this a bit further and show what it looks like in a real example.
Yeah. Okay. So before I show you the implementation of a remote authentication handler inside Active Login, I will give you a short introduction on how BankID integration works to make it easier to follow the flow later on. So to perform an identification with Swedish BankID, you simply use an API that BankID provides. And access to this API requires a certificate, which you can obtain by signing an agreement with your corporate bank. But it's also possible to start your implementation using the test API that BankID provides, and the certificate for accessing the test API could be downloaded from BankID's developer portal. And one thing that is good to keep in mind once you're running your application against the test API is that you will then not be able to log into your application using your regular BankID. So instead, you have to apply for a test BankID. And the Swedish BankID is always used in combination with the security application, which you can have either on your mobile phone or on your laptop. And to run it against the, or to be able to use a BankID for test, you also have to make some changes in the security application to tell it to run against the test API instead of the production API. And this configuration differs a bit depending on what kind of device you're using, but this information could also be found at the developer portal. And another thing that is good to keep in mind when building your BankID integration is that the user flow during an identification differs depending on whether the user has her BankID installed on the same device she's using to access your application or not. So in the first scenario, this is an example from our demo page, which you can find at demo.activelogin.net. So in this example, if a user is visiting our demo page on her mobile phone, and clicks login, she will be presented with two options. So in this case, she has to select the first one, which is BankID on this device. So once clicking this button, the application needs to automatically start the security application for the user on the same device. So when the user gets to the security application, there's already an ongoing identification, which you can complete by simply entering her security code. And once complete, the security application will redirect the user back to the original application using a redirect URI that the application provided to the security application. And at this point, the application could log in the user and know who the user is. In the other scenario, for example, if a user visits our demo page on her laptop, she has to select the second option, which is BankID on another device. In this case, the application needs to display a QR code on the screen so that the user can manually start the security application on her mobile phone. And then there's no ongoing identification, so she needs to press scan QR code. And after scanning the code, there's a started identification in the security application, which you can complete by entering the security code. And once finished, the application needs to or is able to find out that the user has now identified herself by making a call to the API. So that's kind of two different flows that you have to support. But independent of which of these flow that is currently used, an identification always starts the same way, by making a call to the BankID API and an endpoint that is called auth. And the only thing that is required to include in this call is the end user's IP address. And in the case where the security application is installed on the same device, you also need to include this return URL so that the security application could redirect the user back to your application again. Then there's a lot of additional information you can send in this call, but let's keep it to the most simple scenario. So as a response from this API call, you get this information you can see here on the right side. So it contains something that is called an order reference, that is simply a unique ID for the specific identification. Then you also get back something that is called an auto-start token, and that one needs to be included in the URL that you use to start the security application. And you get some information that you need to be able to generate a QR code. And these QR codes also includes a timestamp and needs to be regenerated every other second. And after 30 seconds, this information that you received in the response will be invalid. So you need to make a new call to the auth endpoint to start a new identification. And preferably this should happen without the user noticing. So you should just see like an animated QR code on the screen as long as you need it or until you have had time to scan the code. Okay, once the user is inside the security application, your application needs to find out the status of this identification. And that is done by making another call to an endpoint in the API that is called collect. And at this step, you include the order reference, which you received in the previous API call. And as a response from the collect endpoint, you get this information. It contains a status that could be either pending, meaning this is an identification still in process, or failed, meaning something went wrong, or complete, meaning the user has now successfully identified herself and we know who this person is. If the status in the response is either failed or pending, the response will also contain something that is called a hint code. And that is telling us either if the status is failed, like what went wrong, or if the status is pending, it tells us like where in the process the user currently is. And this information, the combination of the status and the hint code, is used to find out what user message or what message you're supposed to display to the user on the screen. So you have to look the combination up in the integration guide from BankID. If you instead get the status complete back in this response, the response will also contain something that is called completion data. And this object contains like information about the user, like the user's full name and personal identity number and things like that. So your application needs to poll this endpoint as long as you get the status pending back from the API. Okay, so now when Robert has explained what a remote authentication handler is, and you know the basics about how integration with Swedish BankID works, let's put those pieces together and see how Active Login makes use of them. But since the logic involved in the entire authentication flow is kind of spread out inside Active Login, as you can see from this overview picture, I'm going to start with explaining briefly what happens in Active Login during the entire authentication process, starting from the moment the user clicks the login button in your web application all the way until we finally issue the authentication ticket. And after that, we're going to look into the code and run it to see what happens. So when you have registered BankID with Active Login as an identity provider in your application and the user clicks the login button, the application challenges the login using this authentication scheme, exactly like Robert showed us previously. And Active Login is actually using separate authentication schemes for these two different flows. And this challenge call then triggers the handle challenge async inside Active Login's remote authentication handler. So Active Login has its own implementation of the remote authentication handler, which we call BankID Auth handler. And at this point, Active Login created a cookie to keep track of important information throughout the entire authentication process. And in the next step, the auth handler redirects us to a built-in controller inside Active Login. And this controller is simply responsible for creating a view model that contains all kind of information that is required by the user interface. And then it displays a view to the user. And this view is responsible for the entire user experience, like showing messages to the user, displaying QR codes, launching the security application, and things like that. And the view is also using TypeScript to communicate with the backend parts of Active Login. So the first thing that happens when we get to this point is that the view will make an HTTP call to an API controller inside Active Login. And this API controller more or less just makes another call to a service inside Active Login that contains most of the logic. And that one is called BankID Flow Service. At this point, we kind of gather all the information we need to make the request to the auth call in the BankID API. So in the simplest possible scenario, that is simply detecting the end user's IP address and use device detection to find out the correct return URL to send to BankID if this is BankID on the same device. Then the flow service is using a built-in HTTP client inside Active Login to make the actual call to the API. And the service is now using the response from BankID to either create a launch URL to start its security application or to create the first QR code to display to the user. And the API controller creates an HTTP response containing all the information that the view now needs for the next step and returns it back to the view. And in the next step, the view then knows if it needs to start a security application or display a QR code on the screen. At this point, the view also starts polling a status endpoint inside our API controller, and that will trigger a call all the way using the same flow to the BankID API to make a call to the collect endpoint and get the status for this identification. And every time we make a new call to the collect endpoint, our view is getting a new message returned from the API controller to display to the user on the screen. And that could be things like start your security applications, scan the QR code, and it gives the user information about what to do in the next step. If we are using QR codes, our view will also start polling another endpoint inside our API controller to get a refreshed QR code every other second. And finally, when the user has approved the identification, and the security application will redirect the user back to our first controller, which will simply create a refreshed view model and display this same view again. And once the call to the status endpoint inside our API controller receives a complete response from the status endpoint, this response will now also contain this completion data that we received from the BankID API. So at this point, this view is using a hidden form, and it uses this completion data. So this is kind of just information about the user, like name and personal identity number. It adds this information as input data to this form, and then it's using the callback path of the remote authentication handler as the action in this form and submits the form. So that will make us get back to our auth handler and the remote authentication sync method. So at this point, active login kind of cleans up cookies that are no longer needed. It creates all the claims for the user containing the user information. And finally, the authentication ticket using the scheme and claims identity and authentication properties. And then it returns the action result success for this ticket. So at this point...
Exactly like my scenario, a bit more involved.
Yeah, so in Robert's example, we kind of stayed here all the time. And now we're making a loop through active login. And finally, so now ASP.NET will consider the user authenticated. And finally, we will get redirected back to the redirect URIs that are application specified. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the code, and I think I need to restart my sharing to make it work. So let's see. So I'm going to share my screen instead. And open Visual Studio. Okay, so this is the source code for active login.
Could you zoom in just a little bit more?
Yeah, sure.
That's good.
Yeah, so to start with, we can see that our project file contains a folder that is called sample. And inside this sample folder, we have one example that is simply a standalone ASP.NET web application, which is using BankID authentication with active login. Then we also have another example that consists of a client and server part, and this one is using Duende IdentityServer in combination with active login. But I'm going to start with just using this simple example. So if we start looking at the program.cs file in this sample application, we can see that active login is using or includes some extension method that does kind of exactly the same that Robert describes in his example. So we have this add BankID method, and this piece of code is kind of the same that Robert showed earlier. So we add services add authentication. We tell it that we want to use cookie authentication scheme. And then we have this method, add BankID auth. And now you can select if you want to support or add both the authentication schemes for active login. So that is BankID on the same device and BankID on another device. And if we step into one of these methods, we can see that it's calling another method, add scheme. And now we set the callback path of our remote authentication handler. And if we go into this one, we can see that it's calling the same method that Robert showed you earlier. And now we define the authentication handler. And this is BankID auth handler, which is the remote authentication handler inside Active Login. Okay, so I'm just gonna add some breakpoints and try to start the application. So now I'm thinking I could maybe display them side by side. We'll see if it works. Okay, so if we start with trying out the first flow, which is BankID on the same device, we can see that we now end up in a account controller that is part of our standalone sample application. So this is pretty much the same that Robert showed you earlier. So here we define the authentication scheme, which in this case is active login BankID auth for the same device. And we define a redirect URI as part of our authentication properties that simply points to this method below. And then we make a challenge call, which will trigger a login using this authentication scheme. So this will make us end up in our remote authentication handler, which you can see up here. And the method handle challenge async. So let's see if this is too small. Okay, so now our remote authentication handler will create a login URL, and this one will contain a parameter that includes the callback path to our remote authentication handler, and that is what will make us get back to the auth handler in the end of the flow. And now it redirects us to this first controller. So we end up here, and this is using like a method in its base class. And this is where like the view model is created for the view that is responsible for the user experience in Active Login. So we can now see that it has added like localized texts, some internal URLs, polling interval for QR codes and status, and all kinds of things that the view will need. And then it simply displays the view. And now we can see that immediately when we get to this view, the view makes a call to our API controller and the method that is called initialize. And this one will call our flow service, where we have most part of our logic. And this, when inside the flow service, we create the request that we are going to send to BankID. So this contains like the end user IP. We have now created our return URL to redirect us back to the security application. And in some cases, this could also contain a lot of additional information. And now service is using our HTTP client to make a call to the BankID API. So now we can see that we make a call to the auth endpoint in the BankID API, and we send a JSON request. And if we look at the response, we now see that we have as part of the response, we got this auto-start token that we need to add to the launch URL to start a security application. We have received this order reference for the specific identification and the information we need to generate the QR codes. So when we get back to the flow service, it will use this information to either create a launch URL, like in this scenario, or start creating the first QR code. So now we can see that it tries to open the security application on my computer. But I'm going to stop this and remove some breakpoints to be able to show you the entire flow. So if I start this again,
you can click hide on the little overlay there where it says that you're sharing if you want to get rid of that one.
Thanks. Okay, so let's try out the other flow using BankID on another device. So now we can see that our view is instead starting to generate those QR codes on the screen using the information that we received from BankID. And if we add another endpoint here, we can see that the view is now polling an endpoint in our API controller to get a new QR code or a refreshed QR code every other second. So we can see that every time or that it's repeatedly calling this endpoint, and every time it gets a response, we get a new QR code on the screen. Okay, so that is kind of the first part of the flow. The second part is when we're polling the collect endpoint to find out the status about this identification. So let's start it again. So now we can also see that once the application has started generating these QR codes, it also starts polling another endpoint in our API controller, which is the status endpoint. And this one is making a call to our flow service and a method that is called collect. And the service is using the HTTP client again to make a call to the BankID API. So now we can see that we're calling the collect endpoint, and now the JSON requests contains this order reference that we received from the previous call. And we could also see that the response now contains a status, which is failed, and that depends on that we were pretty slow now when I stopped at all the breakpoints. So Active Login has kind of already started a new identification with a new order reference. But you get this information back from the API. So if we instead put a breakpoint where we get the wait a minute, I'm gonna restart this one. So now we can see in this example that we instead receive a call or a response from the collect endpoint with a status pending and a hint code, which is in this case is outstanding transaction. And then Active Login is looking up what kind of message we should display to the user for this combination of hint code and status. And in this case, it is start your BankID app, and that is what is displayed on this on the screen as well. And finally, we're going to look at what happens when we actually complete an entire flow. So the last part of the entire authentication flow. So now I'm going to use BankID on the same device, and we make a new challenge. And this time I'm going to actually open the security application and complete the identification. And now we can see that we received a collect response where the status is now complete. And now we get also this completion data included in the response, and it contains information about the user. And in this case, I'm running it against the test API, so I have one of those BankID for test. So that's why I've just entered this information when I applied for it. Okay, so now we can see that our API controller is creating a UI result, which contains this completion data and also the return URL, which points to our remote authentication handler. And it returns it to the view. Oh, sorry, I think I kind of restarted this flow again. Let's start it again. Okay, so when the API controller returns the UI result that contains the completion data, we can see that we now get redirected back to the auth handler, and that is because the view has now included this data as input data into a form, and it has set the action of the form to this callback path to a remote authentication handler and submitted the form. And we can see here further down in our remote authentication handler, remote authentication is sync method, that it actually get this information from the form, the UI result, and at this point this is encrypted with data protection, so it unprotects the data to get the actual information and the containing the user information like given name and personal identity number. And now we create the actual authentication ticket. So we start with adding some claims that contains this information that we received from BankID. Claims identity and the claims principal, and finally the authentication ticket. And then our auth handler is returning this handle request result success and including this ticket.
Exactly as I did.
Yeah, exactly. And since our authentication properties did contain this redirect URI that we that our application provided, we will now get redirected back to our sample application and this external login callback, which we specified here when we started the flow. And now we can see that this authentication result now contains the final authentication ticket, and we also get the claims back that Active Login has created. And it will also contain the authentication properties, including this return URL that we provided, which in this case is only the start page of the application. So when we redirect back to this one, the start page in our sample application simply finds out that we are now authenticated and is displaying the information that is included in the claims on the screen. So that is kind of the entire flow inside Active Login.
So a very nice thing now is that if you want to use this with IdentityServer, maybe actually maybe you can share again, Elin, since you had the project open with the demo code.
Sure.
Even if Active Login does some really heavy lifting inside of it, using the remote authentication handler anywhere that supports it is trivial. So if you look at the IdentityServer sample
Yeah.
and you open the program.cs, you will see that it will contain the registration a bit further down of IdentityServer, but then it's the same thing. It's add BankID and the extension methods to just add BankID as a remote authentication handler, and it works the same. And then, of course, if you want to modify the UI more than just the kind of easy things you can modify, then you have to do some work. But it's super simple, and we use it a lot for scenarios where IdentityServer is used to provide the possibility to do other types of custom logins or to integrate with Entra ID, but then use BankID for a specific group of users, or if you have user ID password for a specific type of users, but then you need the additional security of BankID for a certain type of users. All these kinds of scenarios are perfect with IdentityServer as well.
Yeah, we actually have a question from Martin, since he's not allowed on stream. No, I'm just joking. But no, it's really fascinating. Like it's clearly BankID is its own protocol.
Yeah.
When was BankID created? Was it before kind of OpenID Connect was created? And why is it its own kind of custom protocol versus using something that's like a specification by something like the IETF or something like that?
Yeah, it was around before OpenID Connect was at least finalized, but they stuck to having their own protocol even after they could have switched. Um, I'd say it's an interesting question, and it is a very deliberate decision from them to do that. I think they want to have total control over the whole flow,
Yeah.
and having their own protocol makes it maybe a bit easier for them to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, and maybe be able to provide this like platform independent solution.
Yeah,
Is part of it.
but still, they could have gone for a standard, like but it's still, yeah. That's my educated guess. I haven't kind of dug into that. I'm not sure if you have talked with them about why they are doing their own protocol standard, or
I mean,
not
No,
why they are doing their own protocol, not the
yeah.
standard.
no, I'm not sure. But also a lot of companies are using like they're not building it on their own. They're using like some ready-made products like that support different kind of authentication methods. So
Yeah, I imagine at this point, like once something makes it into production, it's production software. It has to be supported. It probably
Yeah.
has a longer lifetime. So that's probably what I would guess as
Yeah.
well. Like as soon as someone builds something on top of something, it's
Yeah.
there forever, right? That's the nature of it's just the nature of code.
And
Yeah.
and it's been pretty robust as a protocol, their own protocol for doing the authentication and signatures, and it has been kind of battle tested for a long time, which of course something like OpenID Connect also has been, but I guess they can do things their own way, the way they want to do it. That's I think the main reason.
Well,
Yeah.
you, Robert and Ellen, you were kind of showing like claims coming back. In your first demo, you showed creating a claims principal with identity.
Yep.
Ellen, in your demo, you showed kind of the claims that was coming back from the test API. What kind of claims can folks expect to get when integrating with BankID? Like,
That's a
what are
great
the pillars of them?
Well, active login is creating claims for containing like the user's personal identity number and the name, and you also get some additional information back from the BankID API, like the issuing date of the user's BankID and the IP address that was used to complete the authentication and things like that. So active login is kind of creating a couple of standard claims. Then you can also implement your own like claims transformer if you want to add like additional information for your application.
And in those scenarios that you see that folks integrate with BankID, like, are they using BankID and active login as like the only source of claims? Or you mentioned claims transformers. Like, are people supplementing identities locally with like a database or another data source?
I think that's common to add like your custom claims,
Yeah.
your custom additional claims.
So, in your experience working with Active Login, working with customers, helping them integrate in the space, like, what are some interesting scenarios that you've seen that you've kind of been surprised? Robert showed his son's blue belt taekwondo application, but what are
Mm.
some what are some interesting use cases that you've seen out there?
I mean, it's so common now that it's used so actually one of the most fascinating was seeing a bank using our active login open source product to
Yeah.
yeah, that was a bit yeah, fascinating. That so it and to be fair, it wasn't one of the banks that originally built BankID themselves. So, but it was still interesting to see. Okay, even the banks are using our our
Yeah.
open source product. But
Exactly.
I mean, it's all over the place. It's used for everything now in
Hmm.
Sweden. So
Yeah. One
Yeah.
common scenario is like, for example, for banks, they are usually running on-prem, and it's common that they have like the certificate, the production certificate to access the BankID API on a server, which they don't want to expose outside their firewall. And in that scenario, our implementation in Active Login isn't like exactly fitting into the the setup, but we also have like these API wrappers, so you can use only part of the implementation and make the rest on your own. So that's also a common setup.
Yeah. That's an interesting use case. Is there something that is on the active login or BankID roadmap that you're excited about for folks that are implementing this as a solution?
Well, there's some interesting like new features that is released from BankID recently. For example, you're able to make like a risk evaluation of a transaction.
Hmm.
So then you could implement your application in a way that you will get back information from BankID about what is the risk evaluation of this transaction. So if you get back, for example, this high risk, you can like trigger an extra control, which will force the user to like scan an ID card during the authentication and things like that. So that is really interesting for some scenarios, specifically when it comes to like signing payments and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think them doing things like that is part of the answer to why they have their own protocol. They want to be able to do stuff their own way and kind of move pretty fast with these kind of new features, which might be hard if you're relying on the open standards.
Yeah, I see Martin is writing a question, but he's still he's still fumbling. But you know, when people are referencing an external like identity provider, they're really offloading some of the responsibility in hopes that they accelerate their own business development. Most of the time it goes well, but are there any pitfalls or hurdles or challenges that folks looking to integrate BankID should look out for? Because you folks are very experienced in implementing this and helping customers do it. If someone was to go use active login, what are some challenges they might face, and what advice would you give them?
The most common scenario that people used to run into is like making the entire flow work, especially if you're using this flow where you have your BankID on the same device. So this kind of redirect back, starting the application, redirect back. So it could be like tricky scenarios. For example, if a user clicks on a link inside Instagram and the web page is opened in a web view, and then there are making authentication using BankID, so the security application is started, and then you have to redirect back to Instagram to make it right. And so this could be really, really tricky to make the entire flow like smooth for the user. So I would say that is the most common problem that people run into.
Yeah, that's good advice. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that, like that there's a embedded web view that's inside of another application. That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and sometimes people rip out certain parts of active login to use it in like a non-ASP.NET scenario, and just try to use like the core parts. And I know that is kind of can be hard to get right when using like different devices and getting it right between apps running in Android and iOS, for example. And
yeah. So I hear there's a Java and Swift version coming. Now I'm just joking. Yep. On that note, I don't think we have any questions. So again, let's wind down here. First of all, thanks for everybody watching today. Excellent. We always enjoy folks joining us live. I want to thank you folks, the folks presenting, Robert and Ellen. Great, fascinating project. Do you folks want to point them to your GitHub repo or any particular website that they should go to get any more information?
I think we provided some links that could be that you would be able to share inside this QR code. So it will contain the link to our GitHub repo and some other interesting links to check out.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I mean, the GitHub repo is great. So you folks did a great job documenting and helping folks get started with it. So it's really good stuff. On that note,
of course, just reach out to us if anyone wants to kind of bounce ideas around this.
And feel free to contribute.
Most definitely.
Yep. On that note, again, thanks everybody for joining us today. If you want to, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. It helps us out. If you want to leave any comments, leave them in the comments section below. Let us know how you like this live stream. If there's any particular topics you want for future live streams, we'd love to have the Active Solution folks back to do another one in the future. And yeah, here's our socials. So feel free to follow us on our social media platforms. And on that note, thanks everybody. We'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thank